I'd also like to echo my colleagues' concerns, and I'll do it because it's so important. So much testimony about the consequences to adults, and we heard little to none about the students. And I think it's worth noting that, and it's not the norm, that it took parents for this whole process to start, which is not supposed to be the case. If the parents had not called the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, Executive Director Ross, if the parents had not called, none of this would have happened. And the behavior could have continued. The teacher could end up in other classrooms. And I think that's super important to remember that as painful as this process has been, I'm grateful that the parents had the courage to start it.
Dr. Clay.
My question is, and I don't know if this is appropriate, so stop me. Did all the educators know, look, just reading about some of the things that happened, did they know that this was happening? That to me is very important. Did they know it's happening?
We felt like there was a concern from students.
Make any record when you called the parents?
I did not.
So you don't have any record?
I have
that
no
can
record.
show you talked to any of these parents at all?
That is correct. Seemed like an over touchy teacher that needed to make sure that they were within their lines. Felt like the letter of direction was going to give him the boundary understanding enough that he could make the changes in himself. He was a 60 plus year old man, been teaching for multiple years. Obviously the situations he put himself in at our campus were potentially different than others, I guess, or things have just changed over time.
Typically when grooming situations happen, from my understanding, they happen behind closed doors. They happen in an isolated situation, not in front of a whole class, not in front of a whole group of students.
You're yourself walking down, leaving your office, going down to his classroom on any occasions in that entire month and a half between the time you got the letter of direction and the time you get these new complaints, stepping in and seeing how he's behaving or interacting with his students.
And I do not remember going down to his room.
And why not?
I can't tell you other than that the job of a high school principal is demanding, and I have my own evaluations to do, and I have my own, things to do. So I just did not.
What, if anything, did you discuss with your group doing that would ensure a follow-up to the letter of direction and ensure that it was being complied with?
And there wasn't
Understanding at that time that there was anything prohibiting Mr. Power from going to look for another job as a teacher.
sure he could go find somewhere else to work, but
Concern you that the district had decided, rather than terminating him, to let him quote unquote retire, and he might be out there the next day looking for a job at another school?
that wasn't really my concern after he retired.
You know Mr. Power?
No,
Have you ever met him before?
no,
You know anything about his disposition?
no,
Did you know anything about his attitude toward complying with policies or rules?
no,
But you did conclude that this letter of direction would be enough to stop the actions that were causing students distress.
yes.
Do you, you, not the team, have any knowledge of whether the school or district provided any supervision of Mr. Power when he returned to the classroom?
No.
Did you offer or request any services be provided to those students and victims of Mr. Power?
No.
I want to know specifically in this instance, not a general practice. Do you have any knowledge personally that those students were being provided services by the school?
Not personally, no.
Did you even consider, maybe I should contact Dr. Filloon, walk down the hall and ask him about these things that look like they could be? This could
No,
have been a
I
threat to
didn't.
student health.
No, I didn't.
And you didn't give a thought to doing that sort of follow up with Mr. Phillips
I did not.
or Mr. Ridenour
I did not.
or Ms. Woodworth?
I did not.
Just like Dr. Core, where my head is right now, number one, I didn't hear much about the concern for students at all. I may have heard 2 or 3 people talk about students. That is a concern for me. The other concern is that maybe everything was jumbled up into one, and maybe we need to look at each one separately. If this is redone, if it's sent back, we have students that would have to relive some horrible experiences.
I agree with my colleagues' comments. I am also inclined to think about individual hearings for each of these folks. But I'm also just of utmost, I'm just very focused on the impact that this would have on the students.
There are already hearings scheduled for folks several months out. So really the soonest we could get this, and I'm actually, I need to check to verify, but we're talking many, many months because again, legal documents have already been sent out to other folks who are going to have hearings through the Professional Practices Advisory Committee. It's right now, it would be 5 separate cases, which each could involve the calling of witnesses.
Because if we're going to do it again, I look out at the sea and I look at the professionals that are in the room, and I have no doubt that they want to put this issue behind them. But what I'm most concerned about are the students that have been involved in this, and they've done everything that I can tell right.
Member Katniss.
When children speak, we also have to listen, especially because so often I believe that there's a lot of children that don't believe that they have a voice. There's a lot of children that are too scared to say something whenever they see something.
My first initial thought here is that I can't get off the fact there were only 5 students interviewed. Anyone calling that what was termed a good faith decision or reasonable effort when we're talking about inappropriate touching of minors by a person in a position of authority, a teacher. Only 5 of 13 students were interviewed. There are 8 other students at least, and this I'm only talking about the February incident. There are 8 other students at a minimum that should have been interviewed. That it's grossly negligent for no follow-up to have been performed with those kids. Myself, if they had come to me after a day of school crying, getting in the car and saying, my teacher touched me, I can't imagine. And I've got to tell you that as emotional as the testimony was around COVID and what that felt like for teachers, but as in comparison to what a parent must feel when their student comes to them crying, saying that a teacher touched me inappropriately, there's no, I can't compare the two. I'm sorry. It just, the emotion that was expressed in that testimony and the lack of emotion around the acknowledgement of a parent's horror in hearing that was striking to me.
Discussed in conjunction with the technical drama class or theater class was the technical gun show. The fact that they glossed over that there was tickets to a gun show where students would, if they went, that's where people buy and sell guns, folks. And there is absolutely no connection to a theater class and a gun show. And so for a teacher to have offered his class tickets to a gun show, I find that not being an issue for them was alarming. And even if you didn't know all of the things that could have potentially gone into a grooming scenario, there were enough things at hand that people were dealing with those student statements over both incidents, the February and the March incident, that anyone that was reasonable and had common sense would have picked up on. The teacher, Mr. Powers, being able to retire. They do, and we understand that there was enough of a concern that we were going to put this person out on administrative leave because there were issues around how they were interacting with students. To not follow up with state board, but to not go through with letting the state board know you don't take the extra step to ensure that not just your students in your district, but all students in Arizona districts are protected from that kind of potential misbehavior and misconduct, you are missing the boat and you are not doing what you are required to do.
The severity of action for the March incident over the February one. I feel like had it been handled in February, there wouldn't have been a March incident with the 2 students and the invitation to the gun show because he wouldn't have been there.
To not report to the state board or to your own board that there had been a need for an investigation at the time of the retirement, I think was very derelict.
I would like to make a motion for item B4, B6, B11, B13, that the Arizona State Board of Education rejects the finding of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendations of the Professional Practices Advisory Committee. And we recommend sending these cases back to the PPAC for individual hearings. And we have a first motion of Dr. Kaur, and it was seconded by Dr. Webke. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. So do I have a motion to reject the findings of fact, the conclusions of law, and recommendations of the Professional Practices Advisory Committee for item B16?
President Haley, the motion passes.
Why did the state board deliberate for an hour? Even went into executive session, voicing concerns about students testifying multiple times since it would be separate hearings and the risk of re-traumatizing them. Yet still voted to send 4 CUSD80 administrators back to the PPC for new individual hearings and spared Woodworth any discipline? Are we safeguarding administrators over students? Is that the standard we're setting?